All right, so our next presentation is Working with Beavers, and it is going to be presented by Holly Kinos. So Holly is a conservation analyst at the Mistakis Institute, where she supports the research needs of various projects. As a professional biologist, Holly holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Mount Royal University. Since joining Mistakis in 2016, she has played a key role in the Working with Beavers project, while also contributing to a broad range of research initiatives. Prior to her time at Mistakis, Holly gained experience in environmental consulting and worked on wildlife projects across Alberta and British Columbia. Beavers, Canada's national animal, play a key role in storing water, creating habitat, and improving water quality, which boosts watershed resilience. However, their activities can conflict with landowners by flooding roads, plugging culverts, or damaging trees. The Working with Beavers project aims to foster coexistence by engaging landowners and managers to reduce conflicts, promote tolerance, and increase awareness of beaver benefits to ecosystems. Attendees will learn about the cost-effective tools for coexisting with beavers. All right, and I will go ahead and pass it off to Holly.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, and I just made you
Perfect.
presenter, so you should be able to
Oh,
share.
perfect. I was going to say next step, sharing. So it's still not letting me share. It might take a
Let
second,
me just
maybe.
double check here. Okay, there we go.
Perfect. It's just popping up here. All right, so you all should be able to see my screen now. I am going to stop sharing my camera. I wanted to just pop in and say hi. I'll pop back during the question and answer period, which I've left some time for at the end of my presentation. So I'm just going to stop sharing my camera for now. You should be able to see my screen. And yeah, I am so excited to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation to bring beavers to this party. It's not a party without bringing beavers into the conversation. And thanks so much as well for the wonderful introduction. Like Matthew said, I've been at the Mistaki Institute for about 8 years now, and I've been involved in the Beaver Project since the start of my time there. And if you're not familiar, oh, let me get my slides here. If you're not familiar with the Mistaki Institute, we're a registered charity that undertakes applied conservation research to enable responsible and sustainable decisions to support biodiversity, ecological connectivity, and nature-based solutions. So Mistaki is affiliated with Mount Royal University, my alma mater, and we're located in Calgary, Alberta. So when Mistaki first formed in 1997, the work of the Institute focused on the transboundary crown of the continent ecosystem. So that ecosystem is geographically kind of centered around Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, and it stretches along the axis of the Rocky Mountains, spanning southwest Alberta, southeast British Columbia, and northern Montana. So Mistaki is a Blackfoot word that translates to the backbone of the world, and it's really referring to that kind of crown of the continent area, which is where our work started. Since then, we have expanded our geographic scope, and most of our work covers much of Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, and Montana. The Mistaki Institute's office is located on the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7. Oh, it advanced too early for me, for the people of Treaty 7. However, like I said, our conservation work takes place in many different traditional Indigenous territories, and we acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. So our beaver project is called Working with Beavers. The project actually began in 2012. And we are working with Cows and Fish and the Ann and Sandy Cross Conservation Area on a beaver restoration project in 2012. So from that work, we quickly learned of the local land managers' desires for coexistence with beavers and solutions to some of the challenges that they can pose. So today, Working with Beavers has a core partnership between the Mistaki Institute and Cows and Fish, the Riparian Management Society. And then we work with many different local partners as well, some of which are the Blood Tribe Land Management, Piikani Nation Lands Department, and various different urban and rural municipalities, as well as other NGOs and industry partners that kind of like come up. So the goal of our beaver project is to really foster coexistence with beavers to realize their ecological and watershed benefits on the landscape. We do this by increasing knowledge and awareness and participation in activities that restore and sustain watershed function, by providing training for implementation of coexistence tools, which we're going to chat about later on, and then researching tools and best management practices. So beavers can really be our partners in the face of climate change. And just a little overview of my presentation here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the why we want to coexist with beavers. So what kind of benefits do they have? And then how we want to coexist with beavers. So the beaver, otherwise known as Castor canadensis, is the largest rodent in North America, weighing up to 70 pounds or 32 kilograms. And I have seen them this large. It's quite remarkable. They are semi-aquatic mammals living both in water and on the land. They have webbed feet. They have a large paddle-like tail, which they use as a rudder for swimming, packing mud on their dam, and then also as warnings. I suspect most people here work in and around water a lot, and you've probably been tail slapped on the water by a beaver because you might have got a little too close. So they have uniquely developed teeth, allowing them to cut trees and other vegetation with ease. And their teeth are very unique because they're actually self-sharpening. So that orange coating on the front is actually an iron-rich like cover of their teeth. The backside is a lot softer. So as they cut the trees, their teeth will actually self-sharpen. Oh, sorry. Like I said, they are well known for their tree cutting abilities, and they use these abilities to build dams and lodges. So lodges act as their shelter, and dams act as their main way that they store water on the landscape. And they store water because that water gives them protection from predators. It gives them ease of transport of cut trees, and it provides safety for the lodge. Beavers are very important to our ecosystem, and they're sometimes called keystone species ecosystem engineers. They can help us restore our watersheds and enhance their resiliency at a lower cost than gray infrastructure, while also providing us with additional ecosystem services. And they can help us address both flood and drought. Beaver modify valleys. Over time, beaver activity changes a steep gradient stream into a flatter, stair-stepped one that widens the valley. Deep, rich soils result from centuries of sediment capture behind the dams, creating fertile valley bottoms. And even once the beavers abandon their dams, the effects on the stream valley bottoms and vegetation linger long past the abandonment. Old dams may become enduring landscape features. And you can see the arrows on this image here indicate where there were old beaver dams in this modified valley. And you can really see the extent of the floodplain moving up towards that tree line. Beavers can mitigate flooding. So there's a researcher called Dr. Sherry Westbrook out of University of Saskatchewan, and she actually had her data loggers installed in streams with and without beavers in Kananaskis during the historic floods of 2013. She found that in streams with beaver dams, there was a retention of floodwaters, there was a delay of the flood peak, and about a third of the dams did not breach. Another third did partially breach, and then, of course, the last third had blown out fully. But if you think of that in comparison to some of our man-made structures, it's pretty impressive what this rodent can do. Beaver dams act as speed bump. This really allows water to filter into the ground and recharging the groundwater. Like you can see in the slide here, they decrease the stream velocity and the stream power. Streams with beavers contain water for 50% longer than streams with no beaver activity. And that's because the amount of groundwater they store. This diagram depicts the process that allows beaver ponds to recharge our groundwater supplies. So the pie chart here shows the portion of surface water in a beaver pond compared to the amount that gets stored as groundwater. And you can see what we can visually see as surface water is just a small fraction of the water storage potential we actually see from beavers. Beaver ponds not only store water, but they deliver water too. By slowing water down and allowing shallow groundwater capture, downstream flows can be enhanced by 2 to 10 times. Beaver activity has been shown to change intermittent streams into ones that flow year-round, which is of course critically important for water-scarce places, like much of our province. And most importantly, through groundwater release, cold water is delivered during low flow periods when fish and downstream users need it the most. Beaver dams also increase water quality by capturing and storing sediment. So this is kind of a fun little graphic, but depending on the beaver pond, this can range from 35 to 6,500 cubic meters per pond of sediment storage. So that equates to 382 tandem dump truck loads of sediment stored behind a single beaver pond. And not only is it just sediment, of course, there's a lot of contaminants attached to that sediment as well, whether it be herbicides, nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, pathogens such as E. coli. They attach and bond to the sediment particles, of course, and then settle into the bottom of these ponds. Carbon is also sequestered in beaver ponds. But of course, the work of beavers, some of the benefits that we see most are the habitat creation that they make. So specifically with relation to endangered species, including, of course, our beloved salmonid species. And regarding beavers and fish, beavers create much needed slow water environments, such as their beaver ponds, and increase stream habitat complexity and riparian vegetation, which of course increases insect populations and food supplies for fish. There is agreement in the scientific research that beavers have a net benefit on native fish populations, including trout, salmon, and other stream fish. Another benefit beaver provide is during wildfires. So beaver pond, this is such a stark picture, and sometimes I get lost in my notes a little bit, but when you look at this picture, it is quite incredible. I believe this is in Utah, this photo. Or sorry, Oregon, that's right, Beaverworks, Oregon. But there are similar photos like this, of course, from California, Utah as well, who've seen quite massive fires come through. So beaver ponds can not only act as fire breaks, but they also can be a refuge for wildlife and livestock. And then they do aid in the post-fire recovery and restoration period. So beavers act as a natural flood and drought mitigation tool. However, beavers have been lost to much of the landscape during their removal over the last 200 years, mostly as a result of the fur trade era, where they were trapped for the use of fur hats. And there's estimates that the beaver population across North America was reduced by about 90 to 95%. So beavers can actually act as our climate resiliency tools, and they're starting to get a lot of attention in the media. So I've put together a few clips just of some media outlets who've kind of honed in on it. And this is also the focus of a lot of academic literature as well. You could get lost in the papers out there, and I encourage you to. They're quite interesting. Smokey and the Beaver is probably my favorite title of a paper that's out there. So despite all of the ecological benefits of beavers, we do recognize that their industrious work can create many challenges for coexistence. So traditionally, beaver management looked a lot like this, removing dams either by hand, with equipment, or with explosives. Trapping or shooting were also traditional approaches to removing nuisance beavers, and those, of course, are still being used today. And these approaches are often a temporary solution, as if you have good beaver habitat and a good population, beavers will basically move back into an area. And so I kind of call this the beaver black hole, that if you're lethally removing beavers, it's just going to suck more beavers back into that site. But there are alternatives to allow beavers to stay in place while also mitigating the impacts that they have on our infrastructure or lands. So beavers see a culvert as a hole in a ready-made dam, which they want to plug in order to expand their beaver pond and their habitat. So this device here, we call the next few devices coexistence tools. This one in particular is a culvert protector. They come in many different styles. This is just kind of one photo as an example, but it's used to exclude beavers and prevent them from plugging the culvert. There are ones that do have wildlife passage built into them as well. So the beaver can still travel through the culvert along with other mammals. But they're not able to get in with sticks in their mouth, basically. So the most successful design of culvert protector is called a keystone fence, and it's a trapezoidal shape which pushes debris to the sides of the culvert. And the increase in the surface area along the fence makes it extremely difficult for beavers to plug. The wire that is used in these cases, it's hard to tell kind of in this diagram, but the wire that we suggest using is kind of like 6x6 or 4x4 hog wire that is large enough to ensure that our largest trout species in Alberta can still pass through this easily. And the materials cost between about $1,000 to $1,500 just for the materials themselves. Then of course you have your labor expenses in order to install this. But once you've installed one of these very simple tools are very quick and easy to learn. So once you know how to install one, I would say it would take probably a crew of 4 people, probably less than a day to install one of these. They're pretty quick. It is important to note though that that maintenance is required on these culverts, and maintenance will need to be conducted in the spring and fall to ensure that there's no debris buildup kind of on the sides of the fencing. So you just kind of move that away. But really this takes minimal time to clear any of the debris, and it is much less time consuming compared to unplugging a culvert every single week all summer long. From a regulatory perspective, culvert protectors may sometimes be included in existing permits as a culvert maintenance activity. That is what we have heard from some of the practitioners who have installed these in the past and are using them at some of their industrial sites. This is another design that we use called a beaver-proof culvert. And I know that that term might be a little triggering because there's a lot of folks out there to claim that you know, they have a beaver-proof culvert and then it hasn't worked. This one in particular, we do find is very functional. So this site was installed in 2012 in the MD of Foothills, or Foothills County, I guess they're called now. So Foothills County installed this they were having beaver plugging issues. They were replacing the culverts under this road already to begin with. So they just kind of commissioned these beaver-proof add-ons. So there's an Alberta-based supplier, and their company name is literally Beaver-Proof Add-on. Creates these little T-junctions that just go on the end of your culverts. They have a variety of different sizes to fit different culverts. But the main function of this is really that T-junction. So there's grates on the top and bottom of the T-junction that allow for water to pass through. The grates are pretty wide, so fish can still pass through that. However, a beaver with a stick in its mouth cannot go through there. Some of the young ones might be able to swim through there, but they won't be able to bring building materials, basically. The other benefit of this is that the T-junction is super important because it funnels the sound of the running water upwards. So one of the main things that triggers beaver to dam an area is the sound of running water and the feel of running water. So if you can kind of trick them away from those things, you're going to have a much easier time because they're not going to be as you know, they won't want to dam as readily as they would if they could hear it or feel it running. So this particular installation, because it was a replacement of the whole culvert underneath the road, and there was 2 of them, was about $35,000 for this project. However, the county said that each summer they were spending between $5,000 and $10,000 just clearing these culverts from beavers. So when you look at those numbers, this conservatively pays for itself in about 4.5 years. So another coexistence tool that we can use here is called a pond leveler. So sometimes this is called a beaver deceiver, a beaver baffler, a flow device. There are a variety of different kind of like trademark names and kind of designs, but this is the one that we find works best. It essentially acts like a bathtub overflow. So the height of the pipe that is set in the dam will be the maximum water level of the upstream pond, and the cage around the inlet prevents the beaver from plugging the pipe and reduces that sensation of the rushing water. So since the inlet is located far from the outlet, typically we recommend 30 to 40 feet back from the dam or the outlet. The beaver can't figure out where the water is leaking from, and they can't figure out how to even try to dam the pipe. So the outlet, oh yeah, here's my photo here. So this outlet here, normally it is a very low flow and like a trickle coming out of this pipe. But in this situation, this one was just installed. And so it's dropping that pond to the tolerable level that the land manager set. And so it does have quite a bit of flow, but after that first day, it should just be a small trickle. It might look similar to this kind of in spring runoff as well, just during those high flow periods. So the materials cost for this is about $1,500 to $2,000. So again, it's not a huge expense for the actual materials. And even the installation, like each site is different, but these are pretty simple designs, and we do offer trainings on how to install these yourself because we can't keep up with the demand for these designs. And so we kind of host a lot of train the trainer workshops where you can actually learn how to install these yourself at your sites. And then pond levelers and culvert protectors can be combined as well. So typically that's called fence and pipe. And it's in situations where maybe you can't get the angles quite right for your culvert protector, or it's not quite big enough and it's still too narrow and could be at risk of a beaver damming on it. So in this situation, this was a pretty narrow site. And beavers can kind of easily dam on the fencing there because it is so narrow. So by incorporating the pipe design, the beaver can dam a little bit on the fence and it's still going to flow through because the inlet end is about 40 feet out. So for more information on these coexistence tools, we've also recently launched the Alberta Beaver Beneficial Management Practices. There is an interactive decision tree, which you're seeing here, which was created to aid in the decision-making process for how best to address the beaver issue at hand. So the tree prompts yes or no answers to a series of questions that guide you to consider both reactive and proactive management approaches that include coexistence tool options. So by clicking on the coexistence tool of choice, you will be taken to the corresponding section of the BMP document, which kind of looks like this. So I've highlighted the culvert protector section. So for each of these tools, it'll go over a description of how the tool is used, advantages and disadvantages of the tool, any design considerations you have to think about when you're considering using this tool. And then we do have a section on regulatory considerations and resources for each tool. Our website also has a beaver map of tools, which shows over 50 different coexistence tools and sites that have been installed in the province. So you can kind of explore that and see some different designs and how they've worked, and the issues that they're addressing are listed in there as well. And then, like I mentioned, we do a lot of training workshops and demonstration site tours. So if you ever want to see what this looks like once it's installed, or you want to participate in a workshop, I encourage you to sign up for our mailing list, and I'll put our website link up at the end of the presentation. But you can also just reach out to me too. We have a lot of interest in these workshops. We usually host multiple every year, so you're always welcome to join in. And then a lot of our workshop sites also become demonstration and monitoring sites so that we can learn from these tools and share these lessons with others. And as part of our work, we also produce outreach materials targeted at land managers. So this one in particular, I thought it might be interesting for all the business case folks in the room, that we really tried to build this business case for coexistence tools, showing that they are much more cost effective. than the traditional management approaches, which of course was ripping out the dams, trapping, shooting beavers. And if you wanted to get, there's a few numbers people here, I'm sure of it. If you wanted to get a closer look at the numbers, here they are. And then of course, all of the resources and the references that we use to build this fact sheet are on our website too. And just as one more tool, we have developed a cost calculator based on this research, which makes it really easy for land managers to input their site-specific criteria and obtain a calculation for how quickly a pond leveler would pay for itself. So in this case, if you have 2 staff clearing a culvert or removing a dam from a site once a week, and you want a pond leveler, the pond leveler is going to pay for itself in about a month. So it's a pretty compelling business case. I just want to conclude with thanking our current funders. So we have several different grants from the funders listed here, and we're so grateful for these grants. It helps us continue our work and to really build this community of practice within Alberta. And then I want to open it up to questions. And like I said, here is our Working with Beavers website. We have a mailing list on there that you can sign up for that, we promote any workshops that we're hosting. We promote any new resources on installation of these tools. And always feel free to just shoot me an email if you have any questions or if you have any, site-specific questions. We're always happy to help folks. Myself or someone from Cows and Fish will respond with to your question. We kind of run like a beaver help desk for Alberta, so always happy to answer your questions on that. And I guess we have a few minutes probably for question and answer.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Holly. All right, so we do have a few questions. So our first question, how can beavers be used to address climate resiliency?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think I outlined a lot of the benefits that beaver have, and by no means are we trying to say beaver are a silver bullet to all our climate change woes. That's definitely not the case. But I think the more that we can coexist with beavers and the more that we can keep them on our landscape, the easier climate change is going to be on us. They can really help us kind of like moderate those flood and drought events on both sides, and then also providing wildfire risk reduction and really habitat refuge for a lot of the species out there that are struggling with the effects of climate change.
Perfect. Our next question, do beavers typically plug fully submerged outflow culverts, for example, in storm water ponds connected to lakes or reservoirs?
That's a good question, and I'm just thinking about it here for a minute. I haven't seen one in particular. We did install this summer with Alberta Conservation Association. We did install a culvert protector on a culvert that was almost fully submerged. And so I guess it depends probably on like time of year and flow, and is it submerged all year round. I would imagine that beavers would probably still try to plug it, because if you're looking at a culvert and it's fully submerged, all the beaver sees is, this hole in what they think is a dam, and they're probably going to want to try to plug it. Now, that being said, installing a culvert protector on a submerged culvert would be a challenge that we actually haven't faced before. So that's a good question, and you might have to follow up with me to see. I might have some suggestions on how you could work with that.
Right. Next question, would you need regulatory approval to implement any of these mentioned coexistent tools?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And our BMP document does vaguely outline some of the regulatory considerations. So what we've been finding, over our last like 10 plus years doing this beaver work, is that it depends where you are, it depends what region you're in. These tools have not been used in Alberta, for 30, 40 years. Like they're relatively new. And so from a regulatory perspective, we're starting to get a grasp on what permits are typically required for these, but it does sometimes depend regionally where you are and what that particular approvals office has seen and what they recommend. So what we typically recommend and what we have in our BMP's document is that you have to reach out to the various like provincial government, federal government. Obviously, there's some DFO requirements as well, especially for pond levelers because you are dropping the level of a pond. But so we do have some of that information. It's also noteworthy to think about kind of the regulations around beavers themselves because there are no permits required to remove a beaver dam itself. And yet we're struggling with some of these challenges that there's a lot of permits that could be required for a pond leveler. So we're still learning on that. We've shared a few different white papers on our website on our experience and kind of recommendations on what permits we believe are applicable in the Alberta setting.
All right, next question. How does the beaver-proof culvert allow for fish passage?
Yeah, so I'm not as familiar with the beaver-proof culvert because that was installed a little bit before my time here, but I believe that the grates are pretty far apart. So when you look at like the grid system on the I guess the T-junction of that culvert, I believe there is quite a bit of space in between the grid system. Typically when we use hog wire for our pond levelers or culvert protectors, I believe it's a 4-inch by 4-inch gap that we suggest as a minimum for ensuring that fish are able to get through those devices should they choose to go through the device. For a device like a pond leveler, they might not want to swim through it, and if they're trying to pass a dam, typically there are other channels or other kind of processes that water can still overtop the dam during high flow events, which is when a lot of fish passage happens with beaver dams. We do get that question a lot. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question. And if not, like they do have a website on the beaver proof add-ons that kind of show the specs of what that looks like. And I'm sure they'd be willing to work with you if you don't feel that the sizing is big enough for fish passage.
Perfect. And kind of related to this question too, do you know if any literature on what devices pass fish and what don't allow fish passage?
Yeah, so this is still pretty new in the research regarding fish passage and these devices. So there is some research happening kind of on the East Coast and the West Coast, particularly on the West Coast because they're dealing, of course, with a lot of salmon migration challenges. And so there's still research happening with it. We're kind of waiting on that. But as far as we've seen, like these pond levelers, you know, best management practice for them is you're not dropping the pond very much. Like I said, in high flow events, there's still water going over top of the dam. There's still water leaking through the dam, which a lot of the time, these aren't impermeable dams. So fish are actually like climbing through the dam or finding other little like side passages to go around the dam. So with these tools themselves, there is one modification that is being experimented with right now with salmon. It's called fish lift, and it's essentially a fish ladder that has been built into the front side of the pond leveler. And so, they are experimenting with that, but the research is still being done. And I'm just scrolling through the questions here, and I don't know if Matthew, do you have any more questions lined up, or should I take a look?
Sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay.
Late in the afternoon, need more coffee.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a few questions here. There's a somewhat lengthy one here that you maybe want to answer offline, but with many fish-loving beaver ponds, how does one ensure that they are not dewatering a pond and stranding fish behind a beaver dam if a culvert is placed into the dam? And if there are any SAR species, Are considerations taken into account for DFO review of putting these coexisting tools in?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely with our pond leveler situations, there is DFO request for review. And of course, we explore kind of what species are in that stream system. A lot of these pond levelers are installed on stream systems that actually are not fish bearing. So that kind of changes some of the regulatory requirements. But in fish bearing systems, for example, we installed a pond leveler. If any of you are in the Calgary area, we installed a pond leveler in West Bragg Creek with the Bragg Creek Trails Department and Government of Alberta participating in that pond leveler install. And so we needed DFO approvals for that, and we installed within. I wasn't the lead, I should say. I'm not a fisheries biologist, and I wasn't the lead on this installation. But just from my understanding on it, we were in bull trout critical habitat and Westlobe cutthroat potential habitat, and so we did have to install within the 2 week window in August, I believe it was. Like I said, I'm not a fisheries biologist. That's not my background. But yeah, there are definitely considerations when you're installing these because you need to worry about like turbidity downstream of the installation. Like you saw when you're kind of starting to drain that wetland, you don't want to drain it too fast. And you do need to have a mitigation plan in place to ensure that you're checking to make sure you're not stranding any fish. So there is some upfront work from fisheries biologists that are required to ensure that you meet all those DFO criteria.
Perfect. Is anyone installing these outside of the Mistocus Institute?
Yeah, great question. Yes, there are. So, and there's also a large training program to become like a certified installer. So the Beaver Institute out of the US, who kind of, who has been researching and using these tools for about 30 years now, they host like a practitioner training program where consultants can get certified on how to install these tools. And so in Alberta, I believe Cows and Fish has one of the certified installers. And then there are 2 or 3 other installers now that have their own private consulting businesses that do offer those services. And it's growing every year. Like I would say there's probably 5 or 6 now between Alberta and British Columbia that have just got certification over the last 2 or 3 years compared to, there's just 1 or 2 before that.
Perfect. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much for your time and for your presentation. So with
Perfect.
that being
Thanks
said,
so much.
thank you.